Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Press Club with me, Kendall Burton, and my co-host, Mr. Earl Bosque, veteran journalist. It's a program where we review the big stories making news every week, as well as discuss issues affecting the media. There's no shortage of stories to discuss this week, as every other week, and especially as it relates to the media. There's been a lot happening in the media being as much in the news as reporting the news. This time around, a number of prominent media persons have allegedly received death threats. We also celebrated International Press Freedom Day. There's a lot of discussion about St. Lucia's press freedom or the press freedom situation in St. Lucia on the heels of the release of a report from Freedom House on press freedom, ranking St. Lucia fairly high across the hemisphere. Obviously, you would have heard about the report, perhaps seen it yourself.
Yes,
heard some of the reactions to it. Perhaps we can start with your own reaction.
Well,
to
my own
discussion.
reaction will start with the lack thereof of reaction to it. Basically, I woke up on Tuesday morning knowing that it was World Press Freedom Day, but what I didn't know was about the Freedom House report, which I subsequently got to know about after having written an original article on a press-related article for the day. The first story I heard of it locally didn't even mention the name of the organization that the Freedom House. Nothing about the findings, nothing about the number of countries, nothing about the fact that St. Lucia placed 11 out of 199 countries. It was a story about a local spokesperson, so to speak, for the press, belittling the report and, questioning whether anybody in St. Lucia knows who the people are. I heard one colleague complaining that he wasn't called and consulted on the state of press freedom in St. Lucia. I heard another one confess that he has recoiled into self-censorship because he's very much afraid of writing and therefore having to look over his back every time, and therefore saying so on World Press Freedom Day suggests to me it was a reaction to the report. Nonetheless, I do know of the Freedom House. I must tell you that it is not one of those institutions who I agree with ideologically. It is not one of those institutions I agree with in terms of their definitions and interpretations of press freedom. In fact, Freedom House has also been accused of interference, of being a front organization for the CIA, etc., in Cuba, being involved in, different Cold War activities. So it is not one of the organizations that I would associate myself with, but
you have to look at the history of the organization, how it was formed, and the fact that it's also an umbrella name for a number of organizations.
Right. It is a non-governmental organization funded by the United States. It has been doing that since 1941.
Right.
And I can say, Kendall, without fear of contradiction, that if Freedom House had found the exact opposite, that St. Lucia was the last place for press freedom in the world, I'm sure that would not have been an issue that would have been ignored to the extent that it has been. And it tells me a lot about our definition of how much we want to be sons and daughters of St. Lucia only when we choose to. Because I think any country in the world, any government, any people, any journalist in any country would like to know that their country has been described as a citadel of press freedom in an entire hemisphere. St. Lucia has been described as being ahead in press freedom in the Americas, ahead of the United States, ahead of Canada, ahead of all of Latin America and the Caribbean. And other Caribbean countries also ranked in the top 50 out of 199 countries. I think that speaks a lot to the existence and the level of what is determined and defined as press freedom at a broader international level, we seem to have a different interpretation in St. Lucia.
Conveniently, because I don't think it fits in with the agendas of the people who are speaking against it. But as far as Freedom House interviewing people, my understanding is that that's not the way that they arrive at it. It is looking at the legislative framework within which the press operates, looking at economic development and other aspects of the country's development. So it is not a case where they issue a questionnaire,
Send a questionnaire
and sit down and interview journalists.
So I listened to one talk show host, a caller to a talk show was seeking to say, well, this is something good, and the response was, do you know the people who did the thing? Were you considered? And I think that, like I did, I went to the Freedom House website. I was able to read all of their reports, how they go about them, the list of countries that we have come out on top of. And I did make a point in one of my articles since then, is that over 800 journalists have been killed in the last decade. This is a bad time for journalists around the world. More journalists are being arrested and jailed, even pursued in countries that they run away to, away from persecution and prosecution. A number more journalists are being assassinated on the job. More journalists are also being sued. More media houses being sued for more money than ever before. Look at the Hulk Hogan story. But none of those things are happening in St. Lucia or in any of the CARICOM and OECS member states. So if our legislation and the various factors that Freedom House has been using since 1941 to measure press freedom by its own yardstick, I'm saying that as one of the sons and daughters of St. Lucia, who love the land that gave me birth, I have no problem basking in the sunshine of St. Lucia being described as a citadel of press freedom, even by Freedom House, never mind Eleanor Roosevelt, who was its first chairperson. I'm saying that this is good for St. Lucia. It's not the government. I listened to the responses and you would swear the Prime Minister and the government paid for that report.
Hand in it, But interestingly, and we've discussed Freedom House on this show before. We discussed press freedom, we discussed the dangers that journalists face, we discussed the Reporters Without Borders and the work that they do, the reports that they put out as far as press freedom and the dangers that journalists are exposed to. I was having a discussion with a media colleague this week, and we had a little debate about the difference between press freedom and self-censorship, and how much of the reaction that we're getting is born out of this imagined, and I use that word deliberately, imagined notion that somehow the government, as you said, is over their back looking at what they're writing, and how much of that is real, how much of it is imagined by our colleagues.
Well, I had, when I talk about the lack of response to the World Press Freedom Day report. On World Press Freedom Day as well, the Parliament met, and the first part of the budget started. The appropriations bill was presented. It hasn't made the press since then. We're talking 5 days later. It will be in the weekend papers as this weekend. But interestingly, the opposition seems to have boycotted the first round because only the member for Castries Southeast and the member for Miku South spoke, and everybody left the room and nobody was there when it was time for rebuttal, and the Prime Minister said he was reluctantly calling the proceedings to an end because he didn't feel that the MPs on the other side would have done such a disservice to the people who elected them. I got the impression that the press had also boycotted that session because there has been nothing in the press that I have read and heard of, apart from in the electronic media, which are snippets raw snippets, but in terms of the analysis, in terms of the fact that for the third year, the budget cycle is different. It goes over a 2-week, 3-week, a whole 1 month long period. How much has that changed the way in which we cover the budget? Historically, we tend to compare budget figures. This year is 1.4 billion, last year was 1.4 billion. So is that a growth or a stall or lack of progress or lack of regress? There is no analysis of the figures being offered, no comparison being made. Now the opposition has announced that it is going to call a public meeting at which it will give its response to the budget. I am aware, for example, and this is where how intrinsic things can get, I am aware, for example, that the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate together are willing to and have invited the press to come in to attend sessions on the changes and to give any assistance. But given what has been happening here in the last quarter, do we see the President of the Press Association calling the Speaker of the House and saying, we want to take up your invitation to come and, you know, better understand the budget? I haven't heard.
Okay, well, let's take that up when we come back. With you for a break, you're watching the Press Club. We'll be right back.